Welcome everyone to our webinar today. I'm very excited to be joined by Andy Kodner from Docusign. And the topic du jour is AI pilots, how we get from a pilot to predictable revenue. We are at the top of the hour. We're going to give folks a few more minutes to join. I know we're early in the morning on the West Coast. Folks are probably still grabbing their coffee, so we'll let them do that. Folks on the East Coast, as always, ahead of the game, so they're probably settling into lunch about now. Andy's on the West Coast, though. So, Andy, thanks for joining us relatively early.
Thanks for having me. I've been at it for a couple hours already, but nice sunny day here in San Francisco.
I'm in Salt Lake City, Utah, and it's an extremely sunny day. Too sunny. We need more snow.
I have heard.
Sent some of that snow from the East Coast. I was in Boston last week, and it's crazy the weather out there right now.
There's no snow in Northern California. Not so good this year.
I
Not
know.
yet.
Yes, for the skiers, we sympathize with all of you.
For the skiers, yes. More
All right, well,
bicycle. Go ahead.
we're going to go ahead and dive in now. And this is a topic Annie and I have been catching up quite a bit on over the past month or so. This idea of AI, how you go from a pilot, which is successful, to the point where you've actually operationalized the technology and are turning it into a key driver of revenue, and more importantly, getting enough of a handle on the business to be able to accurately predict where that's going to go. Let's do a few introductions before we dive into the topic. First of all, Andy, so great to be on this webinar with you. We go way back, I think, to our Siebel days in the early 2000s.
Yes.
I almost wanted to say back to the 1900s. I don't know if it was that early, but it was pretty darn close.
It was this century, yes.
Still this century. But Andy is a great practitioner of go-to-market strategies, obviously working on some of the original technology with Siebel, sitting in many seats across many companies. And I'm thrilled to have his knowledge and experience with us today. My name is Justin Shriber. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Terret. We like to say that we operationalize go-to-market strategies that drive asymmetric growth. We'll talk about that a little bit more later on. But so much to talk about today. AI is representing a tremendous opportunity, but also a huge challenge. We've all talked about and we've read the MIT study that says 95% of AI experiments fail. I think we're at a point where people are becoming maybe a little more cynical about AI. They recognize that while there's great potential, there are great pitfalls as well. Our goal at the end of this webinar is that everyone walks away with some practical tips that they can apply within their own business in terms of how to get the most out of AI, and also a realistic understanding of what's possible today and maybe some of those things that are a stretch and a little bit beyond an initial foray into AI. So with that, Andy, I'm going to turn the time over to you. You have been in this space for a long time, both as an operator, a practitioner, working with CROs and CEOs. I'd love to just kind of set the framework here. As we get an executive mindset into an executive mindset, what are some of the top issues that you're constantly engaging with C-level executives about?
The biggest thing right now, and these are like off the cuff examples that will resonate with anybody out there who's done any operating, has been a CRO, has been a CFO, has been a CMO, has been on a board, you name it. And this really comes down to things like, okay, we've got to build a board presentation. Well, what's the story we want to tell? How do we want to talk about this? What do we want to focus on? And do we have the data to prove it? But data can be subjective. You have to grow with fewer resources. Okay, great. How do I do that? How do I find a way to do that in ways that are actually increasing my probability? It's not like it used to be where you add one rep, you get $600,000 more bookings. It doesn't necessarily work that way anymore. You've just started in a job. How do you figure out how to attack that territory? What's your strategy? How do you vet that strategy? You've got one team doing really well and another one doing really poorly. How do you figure out what your strategy is to turn around that struggling region? How do you make sure that they're getting what they need without it being at the expense of those that are already doing well? And then everybody's favorite. I had a big deal slip at the end of the quarter. Live story on this. And it's not just visibility. It's not just data. It's not just the interactions with the customer. It's not just the signals you receive. It's everything combined with the market. So these are all things that I think really preoccupy a lot of us. And especially in the age of AI kind of blossoming, it's like, well, am I doing the right things? Is there anything else I could be doing? So that's what keeps me up at night. And I'm sure a lot of you.
I think, Andy, it's important to note the issues that you're flagging here. These are truly C-level issues. They are needle-moving issues that either drive the business forward or become a significant hindrance to the business. And the reason I love these points that you called out, when we so many times think about AI, I think the mistake we make is we simply say, we need to get some AI in here. What
Yeah.
you're doing is you're actually creating a problem set, an objective that needs to be solved, and then we're applying the AI to that. And I think actually that's probably the first lesson. Rather than starting with just how do we use this technology, start with the major questions, and then let's figure out how to get the technology to solve that.
I mean, Justin, what I wouldn't give. So, yes, Siebel, and yes, it was in this century. I stayed at Oracle for quite a while after that. RingCentral, AWS. Most recently, I was VP of RevOps at Bazaar Voice in Austin, Texas. And one of the things that's ironic lately is that, for years we were talking about operations needing a seat at the table. Get us in early. We want to be strategic. We don't want to be reactive. Hey, RevOps, where are your insights? Well, I found that RevOps has actually drifted a little bit away from the strategic and more toward the tactical again.
Mm.
And I think some of that's a byproduct of AI. I think AI has simply given us a lot more information. I didn't want to say data because it's language too. It's more information. And I think the concept of let's add AI, that's not a thing. But I think there's also a gap between leadership and what works on the ground in some cases. Those on the ground don't necessarily trust it all the time. So figuring out how to get that balance of the strategic and the tactical, dare I say, I'm going to do it, stratactical. Not a word, but it should be. I've actually used it before. And the reason I say this is figuring out which processes you can add AI, either with you to
Yeah.
collaborate like an assistant or to have it do it for you, at least mostly automated.
All right, we got the team working on the trademark for Stratactical. I love it. That is actually a key concept, though, and I think that the best RevOps teams and the best sales leadership are able to meld the strategy with the operations, with the execution. But let's talk about that a little bit more. And actually, that's a good segue into our next slide. When you're going about taking on these really meaty challenges and you're trying to build strategy and you're trying to implement it, Andy, give us a practitioner's point of view on why it's so hard to do that.
So moving parts and orchestrating, that's the first thing. So, strategy, you're starting usually, whether you like it or not, it ends up being some level of top down. So either from the board, from the executive team, figuring out exactly what needs to go where. How are you going to go to market? How is sales going to work with marketing, going to work with customer success, going to work with renewals? How do you plan far enough ahead with enough certainty on this scale so your probability of getting to your number toward the end of the time period, whether it's 6 months or a year, increases? That's the goal. How do we make plans that are as close as we can, but it takes a ton of resource. It's a lot of meetings. It's for most a ton of Google Slides and PowerPoints that may go in the dustbin and never get used again. I think that the difficult part about it is assembling the humans and making sure things like tracking revisions are really difficult to do. And then tracking along the way, well, you've got to operationalize all these processes. So, okay, yeah, we understand that we need to build some new reports on these two new KPIs. Say you're looking at win rates. Say you're looking at adoption rates within specific customers and looking for intent on stickiness. Well, the data sets might live in different places. What do they own? What are they licensed for? We've got a lot of systems, sometimes at larger companies, but smaller too, things that were built in-house, combined with processes that don't flex very well over time. I think sometimes people follow the same process and you'll ask, well, why do you do it that way? It's just the way we do it. And I'm not saying that's awful or bad, but it can get in the way because it doesn't like to flex because it doesn't meet the strategy overall. So you talked about your big bets at the beginning. Now you've got to figure out how to operationalize those and stick to them. And where the rubber meets the road, you've got sellers, you've got field marketing people, you've got customer success managers, you have professional services. How do you make sure that everyone has what they need when they need it? That's a really big point. And most importantly, how do you make it clear and repeatable and self-service? I always talk about the Tuesday night test. If someone is working on something on a Tuesday night, getting ready for a call in the morning, can they actually do all the steps by themselves with no help at all from beginning to end? And I think a lot of this comes from poor data. People have to cobble things together. Even with AI, I've used Gong several times. I've bought Gong several times. I've used lots of different applications. Like after seeing Terret, bringing it together in a way where you've got less manual lifting and the enablement makes sense where you don't have to have an army of enablement people getting it in there. The thing about AI is at the scale we're working now, it's a lot about the way we're working and the way the go-to-market teams are doing these things. Not what they're doing, but how they're doing it. Pre-call research has changed. Post-call follow-up has changed. How we get things or don't get things into CRM systems and reports has all changed. And I think most importantly, the people, well, do we have to hire differently? The skill sets are changing a little bit. The rep or the field marketing person or the CSM that's really successful today might still be successful, but maybe the odds have changed. Maybe there are people with certain traits that are going to glom on and be able to embrace this just in time, taking input from data sources during a call, being able to bring it all together so that for them, passing the Tuesday night test is really easy because it's something that's second nature to them. So all of these things together, CFOs and boards are all saying the same thing. What are you going to do with this extra time? And you look at them like, what do you mean? Well, if you're automating things, you should have some more time on your hands. And that's when the CFO sees dollar signs. They say, well, that great. So you're giving me 10% back. Awesome. Are you going to book or drive 10% more revenue? It's not necessarily that straightforward, but the concept is there. So we have to hire differently and we have to change the way we work to look at how do we bring these things together?
Yeah. Yeah, I've been in each of these different chevrons. Started off my career as a strategy consultant. I've been in operations. I've led sales organizations. This is a real issue. And just going back to those problems that you were teeing up before, Andy, to really crack the code on these, you need a cogent strategy. You've got to have process that backs the strategy up. And then you've got to get people that are adopting on the front line that strategy you put together. But it's so hard to bring those three elements together. And I think what's telling is if you're to sit down with somebody on the front line that's selling, that's working with customers, and you ask, what's the overall strategy and how are you implementing it? So many times you get people scratching their head. I know we haven't talked about AI yet, but it's important to set the tone here because in order to figure out the major problems that AI can solve, we have to look at what's broken and over the 30 years, the past 30 years, why it has been so hard to actually bring strategy to fruition in the form of execution. So I think we've sufficiently kind of defined a problem set and we've laid out why it's so hard to solve the problems. Let's get into AI now. And we first of all want to talk about in macro what does a solution look like using AI that would attack some of the problems that Andy talked about? From there, we're going to get into some pretty tactical recommendations about a phased approach that one can take from going from zero to hero, and all of the steps in between. But we want to paint the big picture first of all, just so people know where we're going. Okay, the key link, I would argue, historically, in terms of being able to take a strategy, a really cogent strategy, and meld it together with execution, is this concept that we're referring to as the revenue graph. When you think about it, if you were to hire force management, for example, to come in and really study your business and put together a value framework, the first thing they're going to do, they're going to interview a lot of people. They're going to pull a lot of data to figure out, well, what are your sellers doing and how are they talking? That's the thing that could take 6 months I've been in many engagements with firms like Force Management, and it takes a lot of time because you've got to be thorough. Essentially, what those firms are doing is building a revenue graph. This composite view, all of the puzzle pieces being assembled to get a complete picture of what's going on with your revenue. What's really exciting about AI is this revenue graph can be built literally in minutes rather than months. AI will crawl your enterprise, it'll pull in your billing data and your CRM data and your call transcripts, and it'll bring it all together and join it in such a way that you get a complete picture. I like to use the analogy, imagine that you had one of those puzzles with 2,000 pieces and someone just tore it open and threw it all over the room. What the revenue graph does is it will go and it'll collect those pieces and it will put them together and it will give you one comprehensive view of the revenue picture. Um, so think of this as a living map. It provides deep context that represents every revenue signal, interaction, outcome. And this is the context that ultimately is powering the AI agent. It's important that we understand that the revenue graph is fundamental to the output that AI delivers. And one of the reasons that AI projects fail is people skip over the data part and they just try to go straight to, I want an agent that will complete a CPQ process for me. And they forget about the data. So when you're building the revenue graph, and you can do this in many ways, but our advice is start here. Recognize that you're going to have data in many different systems, and we'll go into these details in a minute. You've got to be cognizant of access permission. You've got to know how to explicitly aggregate data that may not necessarily go together. And we're talking about really large volumes of data. These are the things that you need to master on the right-hand side. If you can get that right on the left-hand side, there's lots of value and benefit. So Andy, let me just pause there for a minute and get your reaction to this concept of data providing context, which ultimately powers great AI.
And this is such a big deal. I'll talk about this a little bit later too, but this is what you're standing on. This is the concrete. And I think that with AI, I think a lot of people have been thinking, or at least were thinking, "Ooh, cool AI. I don't have to worry about my data anymore. My AI can run around the room and find all those 2,000 puzzle pieces. I don't have to do a darn thing." It's just not the case, at least not yet. So the reason the revenue graph is so important to me in our discussions, Justin, is it really brings those things together. I mean, to date, we've had literally entire teams who are responsible for maintaining and building some of this. And then when things break, it's difficult to keep up to date over time, especially after your business model changes, or maybe you acquire a company, you've got to go back in and adjust these things again. So these have real world impact with real jobs and real resource constraints. So bringing it together in one place is a really big deal for operations.
Yeah. So we'll get into some of the nuances of building this revenue graph. And again, lots of companies right now are thinking through the build versus buy. You've got both options depending on who you are as a company. But it is important to be attuned to the nuances of this. And what we'd like to do is educate the audience a little bit on what's actually in a revenue graph and what makes a great revenue graph versus mediocre data that people are pulling together. All right, so let's get into the first point that needs to be considered in building a revenue graph. You have data related to revenue that is distributed across many different systems, whether it's in a data warehouse or a CRM or an email system. What's important to recognize is that this data, depending on where it lives, is locked down using different permission controls. Obviously, an inbox is restricted to one user. I receive email every day related to deals that information could be important to many people in my sales org. I'm the only one that gets to see it because of the fact that I've got a user-based permissioning control sitting on top of that. Salesforce, hierarchical control. Anyone at a higher level of an organization can review data at a lower level of the organization or the hierarchy. And then maybe in Snowflake, you've got a role-based permission or some kind of a bespoke permissioning. The challenge here is that, as I said, there is revenue data locked in all of these different systems. And so, in order to really nail the revenue graph, you've got to be able to extract the data while still appropriately respecting the intent of these permissions that was imposed on each of the different systems. So, ideally, you've got some kind of a hierarchical overlay CRO gets to see all the VP's data, gets to see all the managers, gets to see all the reps, and you're able to impose that across business-related information that might live in a Databricks or an Outlook or a Gmail. You've got to have record level security, be attuned to private versus public information, you obviously or business information. These are all nuances that are really important to recognize. And the reason it's so important to get this right, some of the most valuable data related to your revenue is actually in email or in systems that are locked down at a user basis. So you can't just punt on that, but you also can't gloss over the fact that security is really important at that level. And any comments on that?
Yeah, I mean, the information flow as an operator, that's what's really such a big deal to me is that making sure that everybody gets the same information at the same time, or at least has access to it, can really move the needle. I mean, this is how teams collaborate. I'm a big fan of the pod model. I've put pods into place at several different times in several different companies, and it just sort of formalizes, hey, here's how your seller is going to work with your SDR, is going to work with your field marketing person, is going to work with your CSM and your ops person and the reporting person. It makes that framework a little bit more understood and it formalizes it just enough. And what it was trying to do was the same thing where people would be like, hey, I got this email, and then they would have to forward it. Or, hey, I don't know if you have access to this opportunity in Salesforce, but I wanted to give you this summary. Bringing these things together in a way where people are on par so that the data restrictions are not holding them back from making progress on the deal is a really big time saver, but arguably it's a productivity booster too, because people are able to take actions that they couldn't have taken because they simply didn't know at the same time before.
That's right. That's right. So when you build the revenue graph, number one, figure out where the data lives, figure out how it's locked down, and then figure out an appropriate way to expose that into the revenue graph so that the right people get to see it at the right time. All right, number two is building associations. This is a classic challenge where I get an email. In this case, Jeff or Carlos just sent me a note and it says, hey, pull the EMEA piece out and we're in. All right. Basically, what Carlos was telling me is you got the deal. The challenge is he's not talking about a deal here. He's not talking about an account. All I have is an email. Now, as a human, I know the context. I get exactly what's going on. But from a machine perspective, how does the machine know which deal to associate this with, which account to associate it to? Most of the information in your system is not going to have explicit identifiers that are allowing you to make those linkages. And this is another area where AI is really powerful. It can make inferences that allow you to determine which deals, which accounts a particular piece of information should get locked into. The AI is doing things like it's combing all the attributes. So who's this from? Who is it to? It looks at past trends to figure out based on that, what can I infer this deal or this account is relevant to? What's the timing? How recently did this come in, and where is their other activity in the system recently that's been cooking? Or textual inference. So reading the body of the email, I can see that we're talking about EMEA. I happen to know that there's a deal that's going on in EMEA. Again, these are all context clues where you're not explicitly saying, stick me next to deal number one, but the AI is smart enough to cobble all of these facets together and make automatic associations. So when I mentioned initially that the revenue graph is able to crawl your environment and identify pieces of revenue information and assemble them appropriately, just like you would assemble a puzzle piece. When you build a puzzle, you look at each piece, you look at the shape, you look at the colors, you are understanding the context. That's exactly what the AI is doing. The beauty of this is you no longer have to have humans that are in the middle of it making all of the associations to it. Andy, any thoughts on your side with respect to the association component?
I mean, this is everything. This is your data mapping.
Mhm.
I've been a, I've been a data czar before, which means like, hey, it's your job every day to think about, are the accounts associated properly? Are the hierarchies set up? What territory does this belong to? Who's supposed to get credit for that? This takes care of all of that. So it makes something vague like this email, and it knows how to put the structure around it that before, either a human had to do, or the worst thing, I mean, I've dealt with this so many times, it routes to the wrong person potentially. They're like, oh, cool, this came to me. They engage. Now you've got a rules of engagement dispute going on. So all of these things can be taken care of at the start if the data is just ready to go and it's got that context and everything is brought together. So it's those inferences that I think are such a big deal.
Yep. All right. So we've talked about access controls. We've talked about the associations. Number three is dealing with the sheer volumes of data involved in building the revenue graph and feeding that into LLMs like a Claude or an OpenAI, a ChatGPT. Just to put this in context, revenue graphs, people might say, how big are these things? How much data is in them? We're working with a customer and they've got probably about 500 employees. And we built the revenue graph for them. And what we discovered, it was about 13 terabytes of data. I mean, these things are massive. It's not just the CRM data, it's the call transcripts, it's all the email records, it's what's going on in your billing system. You bring that all together, 13 terabytes of data. Now, that's an abstract number. Who knows how big 13 terabytes of data is? 13 terabytes of data is actually equivalent to all of the information contained in the books in the Congressional Library of Congress. All right, so that's a lot of information. You'd be reading for a long time to get through all of those books. I say large and small here is the title because while you have massive revenue graphs, you also have constraints. In our modern era, as we work with LLMs like Claude, we want to use Claude to analyze information in the revenue graph. Claude is only able to receive into it about 400 kilobytes of data into the context window. We've all been there where we overflow the context window. We try to drop too many documents in, paste too much stuff in, and all of a sudden we get that message that says, sorry, you're out of space. So effectively, that's about 400 kilobytes of data. Again, abstract concept, who knows what that is? It's actually about one very, very long, well-written email with a couple of attachments. So what we're trying to do here is take all of the information in the Congressional Library of Congress and compress it down into something that will fit inside of an email. That's the fundamental challenge when you're exposing the revenue graph to an LLM like Claude. And so you've got to have some kind of a capacity, not only to build the revenue graph, but also to condense information appropriately to be able to pass to Claude or ChatGPT or Lasha if you're using Mistral in order to get answers. And there are a couple of different strategies that can be used. One is called, not a very elegant term, but basically chunking data for sequential analysis, pass it piece by piece. You can actually pre-process and summarize. So if I know that we're trying to answer a question about Europe, I can, before I pass anything to Claude, compress and summarize the information about what's happening in Europe. And the other thing I can do is build artifacts, documents that will contain relevant information and pass that through. Again, this is not an impossible problem to solve. It's a challenging problem to solve. And ultimately, if you want to unlock the full power of the revenue graph, you have to be able to go from a very large graph to a very small context window. Any comments about this one?
It just occurred to me, it's sort of like the opposite of clearing your cache. You're trying to fill your cache and sort of pre-populate all of it in your browser. So inside of your universe as you're looking for things. And I've been a big fan of different AI apps and tools, but this really hits home because you're trying to figure out, well, based on what I'm trying to figure out, well, what do I need? I mean, is it here? And when you're in the library, yeah, it's somewhere. It's those puzzle pieces around the room too. But trying to constrain it in, I mean, again, I always talk about time savers and productivity boosters because those are what move the needle. Those are things that frustrate go-to-market people because they have to spend their time on all kinds of things when they'd rather be, in front of the customer, but that means all kinds of different things, prepping for those meetings and moving the needle.
So, our advice when you're embarking on an AI journey, start by asking the question, do we have the right data? That's going to provide the context. And if you're interacting with a data engineer or with somebody on the operations side, three great questions to ask. Number one, how are we dealing with all of the access controls? Because a lot of that data is locked down. How are we able to make appropriate associations so we're smart enough to know that this email goes with that deal? And third, how are we able to get access to the full corpus of information in the revenue graph, but transverse that into a very small context window? Let me show you now what the power is of actually being able to solve a revenue graph. You're able to ultimately link strategy, with operations, with go-to-market execution, having the revenue graph and front-ending it with these LLMs. And this is where things get really exciting. And I thought what we could do, Andy, is we could walk through a real-life customer example. A customer had built a revenue graph. They front-ended it, in this case, with Claude. So basically, Claude is talking to the revenue graph, and they're able to complete this full cycle, going from building a strategy to operationalizing it and activating it on the front line with the sellers. What's unique though about this particular example, just to set it up, it relates to European win rates. So this particular customer literally had thousands of deals that they were pursuing in Europe. And they saw overall their win rates dropping. And the question they wanted to answer was, why are they dropping and what do we do about it? Now, you could certainly go in and you can interrogate one deal at a time and figure out what was happening. The revenue graph, which is 12 terabytes of data, had all that information. And because they'd set it up correctly, they were really able to get to a set of answers. So, Andy, maybe before we get into the actual artifacts that were produced, walk us through this process here that the customer went through in order to ultimately get to a great outcome.
Yeah. So the first step is, why are we winning? And arguably, more importantly, why are we losing? So I think this intelligence, without having to interview your sellers, without having to, in some cases, a lot of customers, if you call them, will give you an interview on why that you weren't selected. So again, gathering this information, let alone being able to analyze it, was a multi-step process. Now you're able to do this right in front of you. So it's not just the insights themselves, but it's the access to it and how much faster you're able to do it, so that you don't have to have an analyst or two or yourself at night over a spreadsheet trying to figure out what you're seeing, and maybe you're right, maybe you're wrong, your inferences and whatnot. And then being able to decide, okay, well, based on this, we know that when we follow these steps, or we use this language, or we do the deal in this sequence, it's really made a difference. This particular person and this kind of a deal seems really well suited. Well, to make it repeatable, you need to figure out what that play looks like. And the concept of the playbook keeps coming up because I think you need something to translate all of the information. And I'm sort of talking about both of those center two chevrons right now, where the playbook ends up being the vehicle by which you can operationalize this, because it's the way that the receiver, the seller in this case, but it could be any number of different job roles, that they get that information so they know, okay, in these situations, if this happens, I should talk about this. And if this happens, maybe I should talk about this. And if these objections come up. So this is like the old school objection handling one sheet. But this is very different because this is based on really recent interactions potentially. So you're able to figure out what didn't go well and then what went well, and how to figure out which of those you need to do in the right cases. And then in terms of operationalizing, it's then how do you get that in front of the right people? But also, as we look to the right, well, it's not just what you're putting in front of someone. It's okay to have a playbook, old school, like a three-ring binder. I was never really a fan of those, but a three-ring binder, and somebody would look at it on their desk. I didn't sell that way. I didn't ever find it to be all that useful. I needed to know what was going on before that. Well, the concept of being able to take that play and know that that's the play you're supposed to use right then during the conversation, that's a really big deal concept. Now, I talked before about hiring. Well, not everybody might be able to absorb that. So some sellers might have a style where it's difficult for them to do that. But it's, the concept of activating moments that matter, that says everything, because you need to have the right information to say the right thing that will fit right when you need it, when something comes up with that customer. And that's something that has not been, it's been a difficult thing to do. It relied on skill, it relied on training, and it relied on, the seller taking enough time to familiarize themselves and actually be good at executing against those plays. Even if you've operationalized them really well, it still has a lot of that human element in it to get it done the right way at the right time.
Yeah. All right, let's look at a couple of the artifacts then that actually came out of this analysis. And I'm going to show some anonymized versions of this to protect the innocents or the innocent. But this was an actual analysis done on a company's revenue graph. And just to explain what you're looking at here, Claude, in this case, Anthropic, was plugged into the revenue graph. It could see all 12 terabytes of data. So it knew everything from any call that had happened, any email, any CRM data. And the RevOps leader simply had to ask a question: why are win rates dropping in EMEA? In 30 seconds, the LLM came back with this document, and it was focused on only the deals in EMEA. You can see here that they analyzed 73 lost deals in Q1, so it was able to refine to a certain time frame, and it identified 6 points of failure where people were losing deals. Now, this is not a generic framework that's imposed on top of this particular analysis. Going in, there were no assumptions about why this customer was losing. We simply ask the LLM, why are we losing? And the data gets analyzed. So you can see things like number one, there were no metrics that were defined up front. What's really interesting is it then looked at specific deals and gave examples of why this particular point was a failure point. In this case, it pulled me a conversation. Talking to a CISO, this is what they said, this was what my rep said, and here's the problem with that. Essentially, this is the moment at which they lost the deal. There is an incredible amount of richness here because it's derived from the revenue graph for that company as opposed to using a generic framework that's imposed on top of the data. So that's the first piece. It's the win-loss analysis to kind of come back and say, here's the reasons that you're losing the deal. The next logical question is great. Well, now I know why I'm losing, but why am I actually going to win? And that's the second piece of the analysis. We call it the closer playbook. So, question number two was, can you build me a playbook based on what my closers are doing that will allow me to increase my win rates? And so, again, the Claude went to work on the LLM. It analyzed, in this case, the deals that were won, and it identified patterns and language used to increase the likelihood that you're going to close that deal. So we can see here, the first is how do you lock down the metrics? The winning pattern, you need to identify the metrics up front. You need to quantify the metrics. And these are examples of metrics that the winning deals were actually quantifying. You need to maintain a stable line of sight on those throughout the pilot. And what's really great about this is it actually pulls in real language that reps are using in deals to implement these different processes. It's one thing to know you're supposed to do it. It's another thing to know how people are actually applying that language. So we have the first part of this. It's the strategy piece. I like to say it's McKinsey in minutes, not months. You could have called in a force management or deployed a team of RevOps people to run this analysis on every deal. It would have taken a long time. In this case, through the LLM attached to the graph, we were able to get in a few minutes the loss analysis and the playbook for what the winners are doing. Andy, any thoughts on your side about just what this represents?
You had me at 30 seconds. No, seriously, in full disclosure, I have seen this, but I only saw this really briefly, and it was end of our fiscal, so I was only kind of paying attention, Justin. So sorry about that. Um, this is days and days worth of work. I mean, I'm sitting here sort of shaking my head in the best possible way. It's the real information. It's credible because it's not theoretical. You can see who said it, so you can even talk to that person. You can figure out what's working for them. But the amount of work this takes for a RevOps team. McKinsey or a force management or a big consulting firm, they're paid for it. That's different. They don't mind spending the time. RevOps, there's opportunity cost. There are other things that we also could be working on. And the amount of value this can give to a CRO without having to wait several days, this is really game changing on a number of fronts. The concept here, and I'll talk a little bit about this in a couple minutes, but this is one of those AI for me moments where you don't even have to collaborate with it. It spits this out, then you can use this as your data point. Go sit down with the CRO and start making decisions instead of doing all the digestion and sticking it together in a document. This is a really big deal.
Companies are going to move at a velocity they've never moved at before because not only do they have the information now, but they've got the analysis on top of it. And again, analysis in minutes, not months, so that as their business is changing dynamically, they're able to keep up and actually even stay ahead of the trends. Okay, so we know why we're losing. We have the playbook that tells us what we need to do to win. But now we get to that moment that matters. I'm about to get on the call. I'm a rep, and I have to have a conversation. Now, if I'm a chief revenue officer, I understand the macro picture and why it's so important to follow this playbook. And I get it. I've been selling for 30 years. If I'm a rep, maybe I got a couple of years behind me, and I'm worried about this meeting. I'm on the firing line, and things are happening quickly, and who knows if I'm even going to remember that thing that I got enabled on 2 weeks ago or a month ago. So again, this is where a new model can help. Because the agent knows what the winning playbook is, it can actually in advance script out what the call is probably going to look like. So in this case, just to set the scene, I've got to jump on with a woman named Sarah, her Lieutenant Marcus, that's the CISO, and her right-hand person. And we're going to get into a conversation. And the objective here is to be able to define the success for a pilot. So in advance, the agent already knows because it's plugged into the revenue graph and seen all the conversations that we've had with Sarah, how Sarah talks, how Sarah thinks about things, what she cares about. It's going to dynamically script this conversation. This is not a generic script where, go from A to B to C. It is breaking down where are you in the deal and who are the players and what are they probably going to say. So I can see that I'm given an opener. And then we start to use some branch logic here. If Sarah goes here, you're good. If Sarah says these things, then you need to counter with this. And so effectively, the entire call has been scripted out. Any objection that Sarah throws out has been anticipated, and the rep is given language that they can use. Now, where did this language come from? Again, not fabricated from nowhere. This is based on actual language that your closers are using to circumvent these kinds of issues in other situations. So this is incredible. It is truly a crystal ball. Some people have said, "Hey, can you put this up in real time in my ear?" And our response to that is we actually advise against that. And here's why. If I get a set of plays before the game starts, I've got to study that. I've got to learn it. I get better as a player. If you are simply parroting to me information that I need to parrot back, basically that's paint by numbers, and you're kind of debilitating the rep on the front line. Liken this to the NFL. Prior to the NFL, the running back is going to go in having fully scouted out the defense, know all the plays, know where the defense tends to go, what you need to do, so that when you finally give that running back the ball in the line of scrimmage, they've already thought about what happens. But you're not in the ear of the running back saying, go left, go right. No, you need to go back up. That just doesn't work. So we have found with customers, this is the best way to be able to prep a rep for a conversation and maximize the outcomes. Andy, I see you shaking your head over there. What kinds of problems does this solve in your mind?
I mean, so I'm an enablement person too. This changes the way because the goal of enablement is to get things in people's heads so they can perform an action. I mean, teaching is a noble pursuit, but that's the goal of enablement.
Yeah.
And your analogy really hits home, especially because there's a lot of traffic here in San Francisco with the Super Bowl. There's a lot going on downtown. That enablement practitioners, I think, can really start focusing on different things. This is a huge aid to be able to get that retention and to get that boost so that the rep is able to, again, follow the playbook and work on the latest, greatest, on the, new value props, new messaging, worry about customer strategy instead of the, hey, what do I need to say? Because I think this just cements it and gets them to be better and master their craft. So the enablement piece really sticks out to me. The operations side goes without saying, just the speed of assembly and the level of access. But this is an enablement game changer for me, for sure.
So before every call, log into Slack, get this breakdown of the script, and then after the call, immediately again push through Slack, you get an evaluation. All right, Justin, 7 out of 10 on that performance. Here's what you did really well. What I love about this evaluation is it's pulling actual language from the conversation, comparing it to the archetypal playbook that was built kind of at that high level strategy, and then breaking down. Way to go. You did a great job here. This was really nice. She said this, you said this. But then if you really want to get a 10, here's a couple areas where you missed. So next time, be a little bit aware of that. This is highly specific, context-based feedback that you're getting. So that's the full loop, going from a high level analysis of why you're winning and why you're losing, codifying it into a playbook, operationalizing that so that every day before you go into a call, you're getting these scripts. And then in the moments that matter, scripting out the call and actually giving you feedback. This is the new norm, which is allowing us to close the loop and join strategy to operations to execution. Now,
Justin, the number of roles that this impacts just really occurred to me. I mean, working backwards, that's a big piece to assist a first line manager. So first line manager, seller. I mean, talking about performance. Some people are not good at having those tough conversations. Well, this is objective. This impacts enablement, like I said. It's the operator, it's the reporting person. You might have an analytics person that works on strategy as well. This affects field marketing because it tells them where to go spend more time. It affects product teams because it tells them what language is working maybe that they've come up with. So it just occurs to me that this changes the way so many different kinds of job roles will be doing their job if they're not already.
yes. And ultimately, to what end? This is the ultimate outcome. That's what we call asymmetric growth. Companies are under more pressure than ever to grow. Unlike 5 years ago when you were given unlimited resources to grow, today the paradox is, hey, Andy, keep growing, but by the way, you got to cut expenses. This will truly allow you to take costs out of the system. So, Andy, this is a great aspiration, kind of this state that we've described, but we talked about getting there. You got to have a revenue graph, and then you've got to be able to run the right questions and operationalize it. Can you break down for us kind of a step by step that we can use to go from zero to the point where we're actually performing at that level?
Yeah, I alluded to this earlier. So first off, this foundation, as much as it would be great to be able to cut corners and skip steps, you still do have to bring it all together. And I think the revenue graph really, to me, and I hope for a lot of others, really brings it together in a way where you don't have a lot of lifting. This automation brings it together in a way that the humans instead can do some judgment afterwards to make sure it worked. But getting to the cleanest possible data is not a step that people can skip. The data still matters. And this is, I alluded to earlier, when you're looking at AI overall, you can't just plug AI in. So if there are three, there's a model called the three bucket model. The first one is no, bucket one, AI is not a good candidate. It can't really help on this because there's certain things that I have to do 100% on my own. But there are fewer and fewer of those. And then it's the with me bucket, which is having an assistant. What would you ask the AI to do with you? And then the AI for me. It's never really for you because it's still your name and you have the deadline. But this foundation has to get there so that you can get people more productive. So this is a little bit of repetition, but I think it's because it really hits home. It's the context. So this playbook concept helps people understand when to do what, and that's more important than it's ever been. What we talk about asymmetric growth, how do you do more with less? but also buyers. I've been a buyer longer than I was a seller now. Budgets are also very tight. So it's a very difficult climate. So making these information nuggets, if you will, clear, repeatable, and self-service, that takes care of the how. So the trigger so that you get what you need at the time you need it, that's what makes the moment. It's not having to wade through the proverbial binder to get there. You know when you need something, you know where it is, you can easily access it, so you can go use it. And then finally, I think, you know, taking a look at what you can do when costs are going up and you've got to get more productivity. Again, this is a CFO piece that constantly gets asked. I mentioned earlier, what are you going to do with this extra time? Well, they view time as money very simply in all of the models. And whether you're venture backed or whether you're private equity owned or whether you're a public company or whether you're simply privately owned, all these things make a big difference. Where are you going to spend that extra time? What's it worth to the company? Can you get one more deal done, or five more deals done, or 12 more deals done as a result of being able to automate some of your work? Can you snap that in overnight? Probably not. Some people probably might be able to, but I doubt it. So there is a bit of evolution that has to happen. But these roles and responsibilities in the way that we work is just evolving. I'm seeing this over and over with sellers. I'm seeing this over with operations people and with reporting folks. That's the exciting piece about this is, Justin, it just means more opportunity. So I think people that are nervous about this or shy away from it, well, what's your alternative? So I think embracing this and just figuring out ways to figure out, hey, is this person's job description the same as it was a year ago? Maybe we could offload this and automate this piece and then add this for them. Or maybe we could talk about adding more professional development so they can get even better at what they do. The possibilities are endless, but it requires redefining what people are doing. And again, headcount. Maybe it used to be formulaic. You add one more seller, you add one more field marketing person, you add an SDR. That should bring in this much more, and they cost this. That formula doesn't work as well as it used to, especially because of the buyer's end of the equation with shrinking budgets. So it's looking at hiring profiles. It's changing how many sellers you're hiring at which times. Where are you going to hire them? Are you going to put them in places that are struggling? Are you going to put them in places that are overperforming? How are you going to divvy up and allocate their territories? The segmentation matters. So hiring the right people to put in those slots makes a difference. Different kind of aptitude that they bring to the table is what will accelerate this.
Yep. And I love the fact that the expectation is not go to phase three out of the gate. There are real material gains you can gain from phase one, particularly phase two, which then set the table for phase three. Once phase three is locked in, that's when you start to see some really exciting impact on the business. So we'll take a scenario here. This particular company has about 100 reps. They need to grow by 25%. The traditional approach is a linear approach. Okay, great. If I need to grow by 25%, I'm going to grow my reps by 25%. I also need to grow my supporting infrastructure. I'm going to need another RevOps person, probably another enablement person because I got more reps that I need to cover. Under the new scenario, we can actually rethink the capacity and the productivity of all of these players. And as a result of that, we can achieve that 25% growth, but we can do so with fewer resources and fewer expenses. And this is what this looks like. So, first of all, on the cost side, rather than hiring 25 incremental reps, I maintain the same number of reps and I increase their productivity. Now, how do you do that? It's exactly through activating the playbooks in the moments that matter and driving up the close rates that you're able to achieve. 225K per rep times 25, that's $5 million that you've been able to take out of the expense basis. Are you bringing in external consultants to be able to do any kind of consulting work for you? Or are you temporarily hiring people to be able to double down on the analysis that needs to be run? Again, that gets taken out of the system. You don't need to hire incremental RevOps people. The team that you've got is going to give you what you need to be successful. Same on the enablement side. You can hold off on hiring an incremental person on each of those sides of the house. And then if you're able to consolidate technology, that's another opportunity to take costs out of the system. This AI is allowing us to do more with fewer systems. On the revenue side, if you're able to drive higher close rates for every rep that you've got, again, there's an impact to the business. Now, this model, $7.5 to $8 million, you may disagree with this. The point is that this is a material amount of money, and whether it's 7.6 million or 3.5 million, the fact of the matter is this is the new reality that people are dealing with. If you're not seeing this kind of impact to your business, recognize that your competitors probably are. This is what you're competing with. And over the long term, this is the number that we need to drive towards. And actually, just to put a finer point on that, IBM did an interesting CEO study. They found that among companies that had implemented AI over the past 2 years, they saw 4x the amount of growth rate increase among these companies than they did among companies that were not seriously embracing AI. Secondly, this year, 61% of CEOs are actively implementing AI agents to scale and achieve that asymmetric growth. So this is not a pipe dream, something that we hope to have at some point in the future. Companies are going hard against this. They're seeing real results. It is a journey, but a journey that has a high payoff at the end of it. Annie, any closing thoughts on your side with respect to the topic?
Yeah, it's just more levers to pull. I think CFOs are excited about this. I keep hearing this in conversations. It used to be, we'll delay this hire a couple months, but there's so many more options now, I think, on the cost side. And again, it's real money. I'm surprised the CEO piece is only 61%. I would bet that's going up if they surveyed again. Like, even if that's 30 days old, the market is changing so fast. You keep hearing OpenAI's in the lead, Google's leapfrogged them. What happened to Microsoft? OpenAI's back. Every 2 weeks, there's something that changes. So being
Yeah.
able to look at these different factors has really, I think, made a difference and going to continue to, whether we like it or not.
I'm very excited about the future, what it holds. Certainly a time of transformation, but those that lean into this are going to be well rewarded. So we've only got a few minutes left. We'll go ahead and open it up to any questions that people might have. Feel free to post those in the comment section, and Annie and I are happy to take a few of those. We do have one question out of the gate. We understand that the revenue graph is important. That said, our data is in a state of chaos. You're not alone. Good news. How do we actually start to build the revenue graph? So I'm happy to answer or provide a couple thoughts, and then Andy, over to you. The reality is that everybody's data is in shambles, and that's because, to a large extent, thus far, we've relied on humans to populate the information. That's been incomplete and it's been highly biased. There are great tools now that will allow you to deduplicate records in the system and also enhance or supplement the information you've got with third-party systems. I would suggest that you start there. And then secondly, automate the inputs moving forward to minimize the amount of humans that are actually touching it. At that point, you'll have a pristine data source which perpetuates itself. And any thoughts on your side with that?
Yeah, purely from an operator perspective, it's looking at what you're doing today and figuring out places to remove steps or automate them. It might seem trivial, but those will actually do a lot for your productivity. And again, that's not just a certain job role, it's every single job role. So you've got to take some time to scope and break it all down, but start somewhere and start now, I think is the real message I heard over and over, and it really hits home. So that's where I've been for probably 9 months now, where everything is, where can I put AI for this? Where should I start?
Yeah, I love it. All right. Well, good luck to everyone on your journey. And as I said before, there are huge rewards for people that lean into this and figure it out. Start small, start with experiments, have success, and then build on that success over time. Uh, as is always the case, Terret is here to help out. If you at any point want to partner on your AI journey, visit us at terret.ai. And Andy and I are both available on LinkedIn, Andrew Kodner and Justin Shriber, to answer any ad hoc questions that you might have. Thanks for joining us, everyone, and have a great day.